And then we got into the Chyna debate. And this is what I want to spend some time on here, because there's been a lot made of the comments that Triple H made about Chyna. Steve Austin asked him if Chyna deserves to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And Triple H said absolutely. Unequivocally, does she deserve it? Absolutely. And he says he's got no beef with her. Things happened, he said. And then he went into this weird deal where, without actually coming out directly and saying so, he seemed to imply that it would be difficult for them to put her into the Hall of Fame because of her past in porn. Because Chyna has done hardcore porn. She's posed nude, she's done movies before. And so he is suggesting that, he actually said, if, let's say, I have an 8-year-old kid, and that 8-year-old kid hops on Google to learn more about who Chyna is, we can't have that, because God only knows what that 8-year-old kid is going to find. That was his argument. Let's start with this question of, does she deserve to go in? It's hard to sit here and talk about who deserves to go into the WWE Hall of Fame with a straight face, because the process by which these decisions are made is a joke. And I spent a lot of time answering a mailbag question about this recently, so go back a few weeks in the archives, because I'm not going to rehash that whole thing again. But yes, Chyna deserves to be recognized, and I'll tell you why. I see people saying yes or no, but not really offering any real substance as to why. I'll tell you exactly why Chyna belongs in the Hall of Fame, and I'm going to actually make a comparison. And please don't tar and feather me for this, because this is going to sound weird, but just bear with me here, okay? I'm going to make a comparison between Chyna and Miss Elizabeth. Probably the only time I will ever make a comparison of any kind between Chyna and Miss Elizabeth. But I make the comparison because with Randy Savage, when he came into WWE, he came in with Elizabeth as his manager. They built him up like a big deal. Every manager was clamoring for him, and in the end, out came Miss Elizabeth, who we had never seen before. She was this beautiful, gorgeous woman. You couldn't take your eyes off her. I mean, she was my first crush in wrestling, was Miss Elizabeth. Just the picture of class this woman was on television. And Elizabeth was a very big part of that act with Randy Savage. So much so that I can sit here right now and ask the question, would Randy Savage have gotten over to the level that he got over at without Miss Elizabeth? Without her being in his corner, without her being part of that package. Now, I think Savage would have gone on, no matter what, to become a big star, probably a world champion at some point, whether it's just in WCW and not WWE, or maybe both, okay? He would have gone on to become a big star no matter what, because he was that damn good, okay? One of the best ever. He is exactly the picture of what a professional wrestler should be. In the ring, he could back it up. Out of the ring, he was even better. There was nobody else like him. He was such a unique character. He fit in perfectly in that era. So I personally think that Randy Savage would have been a big star. I mean, a big star, no matter what. That's my opinion, okay? But do we know for sure that he would have become WWF Champion when he did? Remember, he became the WWF Champion because Hulk Hogan was going to go away. He was filming a movie for a few months. I think it might have been No Holds Barred. They had to get the title off of him. And they came up with this great plan. This great storyline. My favorite storyline of all time. The whole Mega Powers storyline. And the eventual split. It was all built around jealousy. Jealousy that Savage had because he perceived that Hogan was lusting for Elizabeth. He was lusting over the man's wife. The most cardinal sin you could think of. That whole thing was built around her. It was not built around Hogan and Savage. It was built around her. And I'm sure Hogan was fine with it because he knew he was going to get the belt back as soon as he came back, if the following year. And they had this story in place. You take Elizabeth out of the equation, that changes everything. That changes everything. Who knows if things play out the exact same way, with Savage getting the title when he did, and eventually feuding with Hogan. That's the sort of thing, it's a what-if question. You don't know for sure, but that could have changed the whole trajectory of this guy's career. Maybe he ends up being a big star, but not quite as big. Maybe he never wins the WWF title. Because even the second time that Savage won the championship, when he feuded with Flair in 1992, that whole storyline was built around Elizabeth. And the phony photos that got published in the magazine of Ric Flair with Elizabeth, remember, she was mine before she was yours. And then even at WrestleMania, when the match is over and Flair kisses her and Savage goes crazy. The two key storylines of this guy's career in WWF were built around Elizabeth. You take her out of the equation, who knows? Who knows where Randy Savage ends up in the pecking order there? And then eventually, going to WCW, where he was again reunited with Elizabeth after a while. That's how important a part of his career that she was. But I look at that and say Savage would have been a big star no matter what, okay? Why am I bringing all of this up? I know I'm taking a while to get to the point. I bring this up because I make the same comparison for Chyna and Triple H. In that, without her, without Chyna, I'm not so sure Triple H gets the chance to get over at the level that he ended up being at and then eventually marrying into the company. I'm really not. And this applies more to Chyna and Triple H than it does for Savage and Liz, because I still think Savage, like I said, would have ended up on top. I feel less confident about that when it comes to Chyna and Triple H. That's how important Chyna was to this guy's career. Okay, and you look at Triple H's career from the time he came into WWE until today. Triple H was never over enough on his own to make it. At least in the company's eyes. And the proof is right there in front of your face. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the body of this guy's career from the moment he came in until today. Now, when he came in, it was in '95. He was a mid-card. He was a mid to lower card guy. He was a good worker. He was not pushed as anything special. He probably lost more than he won. He was just a guy on the roster with a shitty gimmick. That's what he was. Fast forward to the end of '96 when they put the Intercontinental title on him. They put the title on him the same night they linked him up with Mr. Perfect. Remember, they did that whole swerve where they were building tension between them, and there was supposed to be a match on Raw. It was going to be Mr. Perfect's first match in years, and it ended up being a big swerve, and Perfect helped him win the title, and the idea was that Perfect was going to be this guy's manager and help get him over. Well, it didn't quite work out that way because Perfect was almost instantly out of the company after a contractual disagreement. He ended up going to WCW many, many months later. So he was gone. But they linked the two of them up with the hope that it would help get Triple H over. So when Hennig went away, their next great plan was to put Curtis Hughes with Triple H. Mr. Hughes, for a cup of coffee there, people probably barely remember it, was actually Triple H's bodyguard. And I know maybe even on his DVD, he talked about that and said Curtis is a nice guy, but this was not an idea that Triple H endorsed. He didn't like it. He didn't think it would work, and it didn't. It ended as quickly as it began, okay? But they felt they had to put somebody with him. So in the span of just, 3-4 months, he went from having Mr. Perfect in his corner to Mr. Hughes, and the month after that, Chyna debuted. And they finally found something that worked. And then you fast forward later in 1997, Triple H is glomming off HBK as part of DX. Thank God he was best buds with Shawn Michaels, because God only knows where this guy would have ended up if he wasn't buddy-buddy with HBK. So because of that friendship, it benefited him. They started the DX faction. That went on for a while. When Shawn went away, Triple H took over as the leader of DX. Fast forward a little bit more, and he's with Stephanie McMahon. They do that whole storyline. Now he's got Stephanie with him. And the whole McMahon-Helmsley regime. And then it became Triple H and Ric Flair. A few years later, they put Ric Flair in Triple H's corner. He had to be with somebody or surrounded by other people, be it Chyna, DX with X-Pac and the Outlaws, the corporation, the corporate ministry, the McMahon-Helmsley regime, the two-man power trip. Which, with The Rock leaving, he was going to go film a movie after WrestleMania 17. Really should have been Triple H's face turn, which they teased, and he ended up not turning face. They actually put him together as partners with Steve Austin instead. It should have been a babyface turn for Triple H with him feuding with a heel Austin after WrestleMania and letting that carry them for a few months. But instead they made them partners. Triple H now is with Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's not against him. And then of course Triple H got hurt, came back 8 months later. And yeah, he got a monster reaction at Madison Square Garden. I would hope so, given the fact that the guy was gone for so long. And he had the great comeback story. He won the Royal Rumble match. He beat Chris Jericho for the title of WrestleMania. And then what happened? A month later, They took the title off him and put it on Hulk Hogan. Now, Hogan was on the nostalgia trip at that point. He had just come back to WWE. He was gone for like 9 years. The fans turned him babyface. I guarantee you, if that were Steve Austin, after having just won the title at WrestleMania, there's no way they would have taken that title off of him to put it on Hulk Hogan. Not a chance. But Triple H, on his own as a babyface at that point, was a bust. Nobody cared. There was nothing there. He was dull. He was boring. Why do you think they had to constantly put people with him and surround him by other people? Or surround himself with other people? I'm sure he had some influence in those decisions. Because he knew. He knew. They thought going with Hogan might be better for business short term. It wasn't. They took the title right off of him and put it on Undertaker. But that just goes to show you how well Triple H has done on his own. Back when he was in his prime wrestling full time. Thankfully for him, his buddy came back, right? Shawn came back in 2002. He had that feud going into SummerSlam. And then what happened after SummerSlam? They gave him his own belt, and they put Ric Flair with him like a month later. And Flair spent years with him. And if you're not over with Ric Flair in your corner, then there's a problem. Then came Evolution, where the goal was to help get some new guys over. Don't think for a second, though, that Triple H didn't know that surrounding himself with these guys and putting himself right in the middle as their leader was also going to benefit him. Of course it was. And it worked. It definitely worked. People look back very fondly on Evolution. They made stars out of Batista and Randy Orton. It was a success. But yet again, Triple H surrounding himself with other people. And when that ran its course, and a little more time went by, then it was a DX reunion. Bring back DX with Shawn Michaels. And they did that for a few years. And then by that point, he was winding down. You know, he was a made man at that point anyway. He was wrestling less and less. But you look at his body of work, you see a pattern. And it all goes back to Chyna. Because every association before her was a failure. Until she came along and she changed everything. I mean, that woman was a freak of nature. And I got news for you. She was more over for a long time than Triple H was. She was the real draw, not Triple H. For years, nobody cared about Triple H. They wanted to see Chyna. They wanted to see Chyna beat up some dudes. She was a star before he ever was. And so without her, again, it's impossible to say, but more so than with Randy Savage and Elizabeth, without Chyna, there's a good chance Triple H doesn't end up in the spot that he's in right now. Maybe he does because he was still friends with Shawn Michaels. You know, he still had that connection, so maybe he does. But maybe he's not quite where he is now, quite, you know, in the cushy spot that he finds himself in right now. Maybe he still ends up a big star, but not the kind of decorated champion that he ended up being in WWE. For that reason alone, the woman deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. Not for being the first female Intercontinental Champion, which was the start of the decline for that title, by the way. You know, when she won it and they did the whole co-champion deal with Chris Jericho, that was the start of it. You know, and Jericho and Benoit and Eddie and those guys, they helped kind of bring value back to the title after that. But I don't think the Intercontinental title was ever really looked at the same after Chyna won it. But that's not why she belongs in the Hall of Fame. She belongs in the Hall of Fame because she played an instrumental role, as instrumental a role as anybody I can think of, in Triple H even being on a podcast with Stone Cold Steve Austin talking about this stuff. And look at where Triple H is. He's the heir apparent to the throne. He's a pretty important guy. There is no other reason that you can offer besides that one as the best evidence of why this woman deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. There it is. Now, the porn stuff and kids Googling her, to me, that's a cop-out answer, okay? If they don't want to employ her now and, like, put her under contract today because of her past in porn, that's one thing. But to honor her for her past contributions to the company, before that, before she even did any of that stuff, when you have somebody, for example, like Jimmy Snuka in the Hall of Fame, yes, Jimmy Snuka was never convicted in a court of law. I don't even think he was ever indicted. Most people believe, as I do, that Jimmy Snuka murdered, be it accidentally or on purpose, he murdered his girlfriend. And not after his career had already ended. This was in the prime of his career. This was like 1982, I think. 82, 83, around then. This is the prime of this guy's career. If we're going to go down that slippery slope and start getting into the act of Googling people in the Hall of Fame, imagine the stuff that kids are going to find out about Scott Hall or Jake the Snake Roberts. Holy shit. Think of all the things that guy has done over the years, and he's been pretty open about it. It's not very hard to do a Google search on Jake Roberts and come up with all these interviews, all of this really deep, dark shit that this guy has been very open about. It's scary stuff. What 8-year-old is Googling Chyna anyway? What 8-year-old is sitting around Googling the members of the Hall of Fame? If they're old enough to read, I think it would be far scarier to them to read some of the stuff Jake Roberts has done and said about himself over the years than it would be to see a naked picture or a porn video with Chyna in it. Which brings me to Sunny. I see people mentioning the fact that Sunny is now selling herself on Skype. And so therefore, how hypocritical of Triple H and WWE to suggest that Chyna does not belong in the Hall of Fame because people may Google her. Sunny was not, as best as we know, who the hell knows, she wasn't selling herself on Skype in 2011 when she went into the Hall of Fame. She was already in the Hall of Fame long before she started doing that. Here's the reason why the answer that Triple H gave was such bullshit. It's a little thing called Wrestling Vixens. Okay, VIXXENS. That should give you a sense of what this is about and what road I'm going down here. Okay, Wrestling Vixens. It was a website that Missy Hyatt started. This would have been around, I think, the mid-2000s, long before Sunny ever went into the Hall of Fame. And on this Wrestling Vixens website, Sunny posed for tons of nude photographs, a lot of which are still online. You could find them right now. Not only that, I'm pretty sure there were videos too. I vividly remember there being one video of Sunny totally nude with Missy Hyatt in a shower pouring milk all over their bodies. It's no wonder I became lactose intolerant. I came across this accidentally at the time. Of course, it was accidental. But no, this really existed. I don't know if the milk video is still out there. But go Google Tammy Sitch nude and tell me what comes up. You'll get tons of naked pictures of her. And yes, it's not as explicit as hardcore porn, but so what? You're still showing your tits and your ass for money. I mean, where do you draw the line on this? If your argument is we don't want young children to Google these people and see bad things, you would disqualify an awful lot of people from the Hall of Fame. I love how now WWE is this picture of class and respect. You know, such a classy organization all of a sudden they want to kind of build themselves up as. This is the same company that made millions of dollars selling basically their own version of softcore pornography in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I remember being in high school. I couldn't wait to get my hands on those Raw magazines with Sunny on the cover. She was practically naked in some of those photos. You had Marlena with her big fake boobs hanging out, Sable with nothing but a chain covering her breasts, doing Playboy for WWE. So did Chyna, by the way. They made millions off selling softcore porn to kids for years. And now they're the picture of class. Why not just give the real reason why Chyna is not going into the Hall of Fame or isn't already in the Hall of Fame? Because your wife doesn't want her in there. Plain and simple. You know, it's funny, in the interview I mentioned, Triple H said things happened with him and Chyna, and he says, I don't really want to get into it. Of course he doesn't want to get into it, because it's not going to paint the very rosy picture of Triple H or Stephanie McMahon. So let's just avoid that one altogether. That's the real reason. There's your answer. But this holier-than-thou nonsense, I don't know if he really believes that or if he's just spouting off the excuse that Vince McMahon gave to him about people Googling her. But give me a break. Once Sunny went in after the Vixen stuff, you lost that argument. So what you're saying is that penetration is the dividing line here. Sunny, no penetration. Chyna, penetration. Is that now in the bylaws of the Hall of Fame? Thou shalt not penetrate? The whole thing is just complete nonsense. That's the only reason I have a problem with it. Chyna helped make Triple H long before Mick Foley ever did, and for that reason alone, I would put her in the Hall of Fame. And all this other noise about porn and all that kind of stuff is just that. It's just noise. And they don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to that.